The Afghan sun was brutal that morning, striking the rocky valley floor with a glare so bright it seemed to make the dust shimmer like fire. Sergeant Emily Torres adjusted the straps of her tactical vest, feeling the familiar weight of her medic bag against her back. Every pouch, every bandage, every piece of equipment was in its precise place. She checked her M9 at her side, a small comfort that sometimes felt more symbolic than practical. But she had learned long ago that in a war zone, even symbols mattered. The valley stretched ahead, jagged cliffs rising like sentinels watching over the convoy as it moved cautiously along the dirt track. Emily was young, barely 25, but she had been through more firefights than most soldiers twice her age. Her calm demeanor under pressure had earned her respect in the unit, though some of the younger recruits still underestimated her. To them, she was the medic, the person who patched wounds and gave first aid, but never the one to take decisive action in combat. Yet Emily had learned that war often demanded courage that didn't fit neatly into a single role. She was ready for whatever came, even if they didn't expect it. Captain Ryan Cole, her commanding officer, was riding in the lead vehicle. Their bond ran deep, more than just officer and medic. "If I ever go down, Torres patches me up," he had said during one of the long patrol briefings. Emily had smiled quietly at the words, though she knew the reality of combat rarely offered such guarantees. She trusted him with her life, and in that trust lay a responsibility that weighed heavily on her shoulders. The thought of him being injured was unsettling, but it was also motivating. The convoy's Humvees rattled over the uneven dirt road, tires throwing plumes of dust into the sun-soaked air. Local villagers had scattered to the sides of the path, their eyes downcast, faces hidden under layers of cloth. Emily's instincts sharpened at the sight. In this valley, silence and avoidance were often as dangerous as gunfire. Something didn't feel right. The oppressive quiet of the mountains, broken only by the distant bleat of a goat or the soft shuffle of wind-blown dust, made her stomach tighten. Emily scanned the ridgelines, eyes moving like a predator trained to notice subtle shifts in movement. The rocks and cliffs were jagged and unforgiving, perfect cover for anyone looking to ambush a convoy. The men in the Humvee glanced at her with mild curiosity, some trying to suppress their nerves, others already accustomed to the tension of patrol. The younger soldiers were whispering and joking nervously to keep their minds off the potential threat. But Emily didn't smile. She focused on the details, shadows that moved unnaturally, sudden gusts of wind, a smell of smoke from far-off fires. "Sergeant Torres," Captain Cole called over the radio, his voice calm, but with an edge she recognized. Eyes sharp. "Keep your medic bag ready. We might be walking into hot terrain." Emily nodded, even though he couldn't see her. She tightened the straps of her bag, ensuring every item was secure. In the quiet moments before an engagement, she often checked and rechecked her gear, not out of nervousness, but out of habit. She knew that in the chaos of battle, every second saved by preparation could mean the difference between life and death. As the convoy crested a small rise, Emily's gaze fell on the valley ahead. It was breathtaking in its harsh beauty, the mountains standing tall, almost indifferent to the human lives being carried through their shadow. Yet there was something off. The air was still. Too still. Birds that normally would have scattered at the sound of approaching vehicles were absent. Dust devils, which usually danced across the valley floor in the morning heat, seemed frozen in place. Emily's heart rate increased slightly. She had learned to trust these subtle signs. The quiet before the storm often preceded the chaos of an ambush. The soldiers in the Humvee ahead were chatting idly, trying to keep morale high. One young private laughed at a joke he'd heard the day before, but Emily barely registered it. Her focus was on the valley, on the potential threat. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on her chest, the lives of her comrades. The safety of Captain Cole and the mission itself rested in a delicate balance that could shift in an instant. She adjusted her helmet and whispered a silent prayer, a habit she had picked up over the months. Keep us alive. Keep us alive. As the convoy inched forward, Emily could see movement in the distance. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but there. Shadows shifting behind rocks, a flicker of motion too calculated to be natural. She pointed it out to the soldier beside her, who shrugged nervously. Probably just goats, he said. Emily didn't reply. In her experience, mistakes in judgment could be fatal, and she had learned that second-guessing instincts could cost lives. Her eyes remained fixed on the ridgeline, scanning for the slightest hint of danger. Hours on patrol often felt like eternity, and Emily knew that the calm of the morning was only temporary. The valley seemed alive with anticipation, every rustle of gravel, every distant sound amplified by the mountains. Her training had taught her to stay calm, to keep her mind sharp, and to be ready for the moment when the first shot rang out. That moment could come without warning, and she had to be prepared, not just to heal wounds, but to act decisively if survival demanded it. Captain Cole glanced back at her, giving a slight nod. Emily returned it with a firm look, silently communicating that she was ready for whatever came. The convoy's Humvees continued along the dusty road, unaware of the danger that lay in wait. Emily tightened her grip on her med kit, feeling the familiar leather straps against her palms. Her breath came steady, controlled, even as her senses heightened, scanning for movement, calculating distance, and imagining the possible trajectories of bullets before they were even fired. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting harsh shadows across the valley floor. Emily's thoughts briefly wandered to home, the life she had left behind, the family she worried about, the small comforts that seemed so far away. But she quickly pushed them aside. There was no room for distraction here. Every second counted. Every decision mattered. The calm before the storm was a dangerous illusion, and Emily knew it. She had seen enough battles to understand that the quiet moments were often the most perilous. As the convoy reached the narrowest part of the pass, Emily's pulse quickened. She could sense it now, an almost tangible tension in the air, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. The slightest misstep could trigger chaos. She glanced at Captain Cole, who was scanning the ridges with his binoculars, jaw tight. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple, but she didn't wipe it away. Focus mattered more than comfort. Emily adjusted her position, keeping her back straight against the Humvee's armor as the vehicle rattled over rocks. Every muscle in her body was alert, ready to react, ready to save lives. She checked the tourniquets in her bag, the morphine auto-injector, and the bandages. Everything was in place. She didn't know what the day would bring, but she knew she would be ready. The quiet stretched on, the calm deceptive, and Emily waited, knowing the moment of truth was approaching. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of rocks shifting suggested that the ambush might already be in motion. Emily's heart hammered in her chest, not with fear, but with the intense clarity of purpose that only comes when survival hangs by a thread. She inhaled deeply, feeling the dust fill her lungs, and exhaled slowly, centering herself. Every step of the patrol, every decision she had made, had led to this point. She didn't know what awaited her, but she was ready to face it head-on. The valley lay before her like a giant predator, silent and waiting. Emily tightened her gloves, adjusted her helmet, and whispered to herself, "This is just another patrol. Just another day." And yet, she knew better. Something was coming. Something dangerous. And when it arrived, Emily Torres would be ready. The convoy had barely crested the ridge when the world erupted into chaos. An explosion tore through the lead Humvee, sending fire, metal, and dust into the blistering Afghan air. Emily's ears rang as the blast shook the ground beneath her. and she instinctively ducked behind the armored vehicle she rode in. Smoke and debris filled the valley like a suffocating storm, cutting visibility to mere feet. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline flooding her veins as she struggled to make sense of the carnage. Through the choking dust, she saw him. Captain Ryan Cole, sprawled on the dirt road, his uniform soaked in blood. A round had struck his shoulder, tearing through fabric and flesh alike. He groaned, trying to lift his head, but every movement made him wince. "Captain!" Emily screamed, ignoring the sharp crack of bullets tearing through the air around her. Her boots pounded against the dusty ground as she sprinted toward him, every second stretching into eternity. Bullets whizzed past her, nicking the vehicle, ricocheting off rocks, and slicing through the air with deadly precision. The valley, moments ago silent, now screamed with war, the cacophony of gunfire, the distant explosions of IEDs, and the shouts of terrified soldiers blending into a symphony of survival. Emily's training had prepared her for moments like this, but nothing could fully steel a person for the raw, unrelenting terror of being under direct fire. She reached Cole and dropped beside him, heart hammering as her hands moved automatically. The medic's instincts took over, guiding her fingers to locate the wound, applying a tourniquet with precision born of countless drills and prior missions. Each second was critical, and each second could mean life or death. "Stay with me, sir. Focus on me," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The metallic scent of blood mixed with the dust in her nostrils, a stark reminder of how fragile life could be in these moments. Around her, the rest of the unit scrambled for cover. A young private froze, panic in his eyes as the bullets tore past them. Emily barked a command over the noise. "Cover me. If you want him alive, you move now." Her voice was firm, a weapon almost as sharp as the rifle she didn't yet draw. She focused, pushing aside fear, ignoring the burning sting of sweat and grime against her skin. Every second counted, and hesitation was a luxury no one could afford. The insurgents were smart, using the terrain to their advantage. Hidden among jagged rocks and sparse shrubs, they picked their shots with cold precision, each round echoing off the valley walls. Emily felt the vibrations of a nearby shot as it tore through the ground inches from her knee. She flinched, but didn't let herself be paralyzed. Her eyes darted between Cole's face and the ridgelines, calculating angles, assessing the enemy's positions. Survival wasn't just instinct. It was calculation, quick thinking, and nerve. She tore open her med kit, grabbing bandages and gauze, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. The wind carried sand into her eyes, her gloves slick with sweat and blood, but she kept going. Her mind was a singular focus: save the captain. Around them, the convoy had dissolved into a mess of armored vehicles and scattered soldiers, each fighting their own battle. Emily noticed one of the younger soldiers, trying to aim at the cliff above, trembling violently. "Shoot! Aim, goddammit!" she screamed, pulling him behind her for cover. The boy looked at her, frozen, eyes wide with fear. Emily could almost feel the terror radiating off him, but she didn't have time to comfort him. "If you don't fire, we're all dead," she barked, shoving him toward a better firing position. The boy hesitated, then pulled the trigger. His first shot went wide, but Emily didn't have time to scold him. Every second was precious. Another explosion rocked the ground, sending shards of rock flying. Emily's helmet caught a piece of shrapnel, the metal scraping against her scalp. Pain shot through her, but she ignored it. She wrapped a tourniquet tighter around Cole's shoulder, pressing the wound to stem the bleeding. "Almost there," she muttered under her breath, voice tight with strain. His pulse was weak, and she could feel the shock beginning to set in. She had to act fast. Every heartbeat mattered. Emily scanned the ridges again. Movement. Another insurgent, taking aim from the cliffside. Her rifleman was down, pinned under the blast. She felt a flash of fear, but fear had no place here. She shouted a warning, dragging Cole slightly behind a small rise in the dirt. Her boots sank into loose gravel, sliding under the weight of his body. Her muscles screamed in protest, burning from exertion, but she refused to stop. If she paused for even a moment, Cole wouldn't survive. The sun reflected off the dust in the valley, making it nearly impossible to see clearly. Shadows danced and shifted, hiding lethal threats. Emily relied on instinct and experience, predicting where the next shot would come from. She yelled coordinates into the radio, trying desperately to reach any support in the area. The radio crackled, almost drowned out by the din of gunfire, but she persisted. Help would come, it had to. Until then, they were alone. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded near the convoy, throwing everyone off balance. Emily shielded Cole as debris rained down, the acrid smell of smoke and fire filling her lungs. She dragged him again, each inch forward a battle against gravity, fatigue, and fear. She could feel every heartbeat of her own body thundering, every nerve on fire, but she pressed on. In her mind, only one thought persisted: he must live. Moments stretched into minutes. Emily could barely hear herself think over the constant roar of bullets, the screams, and the thunder of explosions. Her hands were raw, her arms burning, her uniform soaked with sweat and Cole's blood. Yet she refused to let herself falter. Every second she kept moving, every bit of pressure she applied to the wound increased his chance of survival. It was not just her skill. It was willpower, pure and unyielding, driving her forward. The insurgents shifted their focus, realizing their initial ambush had slowed. They began to concentrate on Emily and Cole, closing in with deliberate precision. Emily's stomach tightened. They were running out of time. She gritted her teeth, lifted her eyes to the cliffside, and prepared herself for the next move, knowing instinctively that she might have to do more than just save the captain. The valley, once calm and silent, was now a crucible of death. And yet, amidst the chaos, Emily remained resolute. Her mind was laser-focused, every decision calculated, every movement purposeful. She whispered a silent promise: "We make it through this, or we don't make it at all." She glanced briefly at the younger soldiers, seeing the fear in their eyes mirrored her own in earlier days. But she pushed that aside, focusing on Cole's pale, pained face. He was her responsibility, and she would not fail. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the valley trembling with the echo of explosions. Emily adjusted Cole in her arms, preparing to move him to safer cover. The world had narrowed down to two things: the wounded man she could not leave, and the deadly fire that surrounded them. Every decision she made now carried the weight of life and death. One wrong move, one hesitation, and everything could be lost. And then she saw a faint shadow moving among the rocks, the enemy regrouping. Emily inhaled deeply, bracing herself for what was to come. The calm of the morning had shattered, replaced by the relentless roar of combat. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the bullets streaking past. She tightened her grip on Cole and whispered to herself, "We survive. We survive together." Emily dropped beside Captain Ryan Cole, her knees pressing into the dusty ground as the roar of gunfire and explosions battered the valley around them. The world had become a blur of smoke, fire, and dust, punctuated by the screams of soldiers and the deadly ping of bullets ricocheting off rocks. Her heart raced, but her hands moved with mechanical precision, guided by years of training and countless drills. She ripped open her med kit, bandages and supplies spilling out like a lifeline she had carried thousands of miles to this very moment. The wound in Cole's shoulder was severe. Blood had already soaked through his uniform, spreading quickly and pooling against the dust beneath him. Emily applied pressure, pressing gauze tightly against the torn flesh, then wrapped a tourniquet, as best she could, in the uneven ground. "Stay with me, sir," she shouted over the chaos, her voice cutting through the din. His eyes fluttered open, pain and fear mingling in their depths. I'm fine," he gasped, but Emily ignored him. Survival required action, not bravado. Around them, the rest of the unit was scattered. One young private huddled behind a Humvee, trembling as he tried to aim his rifle toward the cliffside, where the insurgents crouched among the rocks. Another soldier screamed for help, pinned beneath the weight of debris from a nearby explosion. Emily's eyes darted across the battlefield, taking in every threat, every potential avenue of attack. Her training demanded that she assess risk constantly, not just for herself, but for everyone in her charge. "Cover me," she yelled to the nearest soldiers. "If you want him alive, you fire now." The private shook violently, his hands quivering as he gripped his weapon. Emily grabbed his shoulder, her touch firm and unyielding. "Focus. Fire in short bursts. Aim for the shadows." Her voice left no room for hesitation. The boy's first shots missed entirely, ricocheting harmlessly off rocks, but Emily didn't pause to scold him. They didn't have the luxury of dwelling on mistakes. Every second counted, every heartbeat mattered. Cole groaned as she worked, pain etched into his features. Emily's hands moved rapidly, wrapping bandages, checking the severity of his injury, and applying pressure where needed. Her gloves were slick with his blood and dust, sticky and hot against her skin, but she didn't flinch. The smell of gunpowder, smoke, and iron filled her nostrils, mingling into a pungent reminder of the chaos around them. The world had narrowed down to a single focus, keeping the captain alive. A round struck near them, shattering a rock and sending shards flying like deadly rain. Emily instinctively pushed Cole down, taking the brunt of the debris against her own body. She winced as a sharp fragment grazed her arm, but she refused to acknowledge the pain. There was no time. There was only action, only the relentless determination to preserve life amidst death. She glanced quickly at the ridgeline, noting every movement, every shadow, predicting where the next shots might come from. "Emily, I can't," Cole muttered through gritted teeth. "Don't talk, don't move too much," she replied, her voice calm but edged with urgency. "I've got you. You're not dying here." She caught a glimpse of the younger private again, who was frozen with fear. She dragged him down behind the Humvee. "If you can't act, someone else will die," she snapped. The words were harsh, but in war, harsh truths were sometimes the only way to survive. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Bullets zipped past, some striking the Humvee, sending sparks and metal fragments into the air. Explosions rocked the valley, throwing loose dirt and pebbles into Emily's eyes. She blinked rapidly, ignoring the sting, and continued her work. Her body ached, every muscle straining, but she remained focused, a calm in the eye of a storm. She had trained for this, dreamed of avoiding it, but now it was unavoidable, real, and terrifying. Emily's mind worked on multiple levels at once, administering first aid, commanding others, assessing the battlefield, and predicting enemy movements. She noticed a small cluster of insurgents advancing toward their position, weapons raised and firing with deliberate intent. She knew the young private wouldn't be able to handle them alone. She grabbed his rifle, racked the bolt, and fired a warning burst, sending the nearest enemy ducking for cover. The boy stared at her, wide-eyed. Emily didn't have time to reassure him. She had to keep moving, keep fighting, keep saving lives. Cole's breathing was shallow now, the shock setting in. Emily pressed harder on the wound, wrapping the tourniquet tighter, whispering under her breath, "Stay alive. Breathe. Focus. survive. Her own fear was secondary, suppressed beneath layers of training and sheer determination. Around them, the battle raged on, but her world had narrowed to the captain's pale face and the blood that soaked the dust. Another soldier fell nearby, screaming as he was hit in the leg. Emily's mind raced. She couldn't save everyone at once, but she had to save him. She shouted for the others to provide cover fire, gesturing frantically to positions where they could suppress the enemy. The chaos of war had a rhythm, and she was finding it, moving with it, bending it to her will. Survival was not just chance. It was control, decision, and speed. She shifted Cole slightly, dragging him toward a small rise in the dirt that offered limited cover. Bullets tore into the soil around him, kicking up dirt and rock. Emily's boots sank into loose gravel as she pulled him, muscles straining, sweat and blood blending into a gritty paste against her uniform. Pain radiated through her arms and back, but she ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. Life or death was now measured in inches and seconds. For a moment, she allowed herself a brief flash of fear, the terrifying awareness of how close they were to death. But she pushed it aside immediately. Fear was a tool in her hands only if it sharpened her focus. Otherwise, it was lethal. She redoubled her efforts, checking the tourniquet, making sure the bandage held firm, adjusting her grip, scanning constantly for new threats. The insurgents shifted again, trying to flank them. Emily's eyes narrowed. She estimated their movements, predicting their paths and adjusting her position, dragging Cole to a slightly safer angle. She barked commands, coordinated with the remaining soldiers, and even positioned herself to suppress fire if necessary. She was not just a medic. In this moment, she was the spine of the unit, the decision-maker, and the shield between life and death. Minutes felt like hours. Emily's muscles screamed, her hands cramped, and her lungs burned with every breath, yet she refused to falter. She glanced at Cole, his eyes half-closed, face pale but alive, and felt a renewed surge of determination. "You're not dying today. Not on my watch." She pressed the bandages tighter, whispered reassurances, and prepared for the next move. The battle was far from over. The air was thick with smoke and dust, bullets streaking past, explosions erupting in a chaotic rhythm. Emily continued to administer aid, protect her comrades, and plan for their survival. Each second was critical, each decision life-saving. She had become a force unto herself, calm, precise, and relentless. Under fire, under pressure, she refused to break. Survival depended on her, and she would not fail. The valley around Emily Torres had become a nightmare. Dust and smoke swirled in the air, obscuring vision and making every movement treacherous. Bullets whizzed past with deadly speed, ricocheting off rocks and armored vehicles. The air vibrated with the sharp cracks of gunfire and the distant thud of explosions. Emily's hands were slick with Captain Cole's blood, her gloves torn and sticky, but she didn't pause. The captain's wound was severe, and the enemy was closing in. She made a split-second decision. They could not remain exposed where they were. "I've got you, sir." "Hold on," she whispered, voice steady despite the chaos. Emily slid under Cole's arms, lifting him carefully, his body heavy and uncooperative. Her muscles screamed with the effort, burning from exertion, but she gritted her teeth. The distance to the nearest cover, a shallow ditch 30 or 40 meters away, felt endless under fire. Every second she dragged him, bullets tore through the air, kicking dirt and small rocks against her uniform and helmet. She could feel the sharp sting as a round grazed her arm, slicing through her sleeve and scraping the skin beneath. Pain shot up her spine, but Emily ignored it. Pain was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every inch mattered. She focused on the captain, checking his pulse with one hand while dragging him with the other, calculating each movement to minimize exposure. Her breaths came ragged and shallow, but she forced herself to stay controlled. Fear was a tool she wielded, not a chain that bound her. Around them, the battlefield was chaos incarnate. Other soldiers scrambled for cover, some firing blindly, some immobilized by panic. Emily caught sight of a young private frozen behind the wreckage of a Humvee. She didn't have time to coax him into action. She kept moving, dragging Cole inch by inch, ignoring the screams and explosions. Every step she took was a battle, not just against the enemy, but against fatigue, fear, and the harsh terrain beneath her boots. The captain groaned in pain, the blood from his shoulder matting his uniform to his chest. "Hang on, sir." "Almost there," Emily muttered, teeth gritted. She adjusted her grip, slipping a hand under his armpit and the other beneath his legs, dragging him like a wounded soldier she had vowed to protect. Dirt and gravel tore at her hands, cuts and abrasions multiplying, but she refused to stop. Life and death were balanced on a knife's edge, and she would tip it toward survival. Bullets kicked up dirt around her face, some landing mere inches from the two of them. Emily twisted slightly, using Cole's body as partial cover, calculating trajectories and anticipating where the next volley would come from. Her senses were heightened beyond normal perception, hearing the subtle clicks of rifles being chambered, seeing flashes among rocks that betrayed the enemy's positions, feeling the vibrations of the ground from distant explosions. Survival was instinct, training, and courage all fused together. For a moment, she allowed herself to glimpse the valley around them. The once beautiful terrain, bathed in the harsh Afghan sun, now looked like a war-torn wasteland. Smoke curled from distant Humvees. Rocks were stained with dirt and blood, and the cries of soldiers and enemies mingled in a terrible symphony. Emily didn't allow herself to dwell on it. There was no time to mourn or fear. Her focus remained singular: move the captain to safety. She noticed movement on a nearby ridge, insurgents repositioning, preparing to cut off any escape. Emily cursed under her breath. The ditch offered limited cover, but it was their only chance. She shifted Cole slightly, dragging him closer, her gloves slipping against the blood-soaked fabric of his uniform. She could feel each heartbeat, each shiver of shock in his body, and the weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders heavier than the body she carried. "Almost there," she whispered again, trying to reassure both him and herself. Each step was agony, muscles screaming, lungs burning, arms trembling under the strain. Yet she pushed forward, refusing to pause. Behind her, a young soldier finally opened fire on the insurgents, suppressing them momentarily. Emily used the distraction to drag Cole another few meters, sweat stinging her eyes, blood soaking her uniform. A new threat emerged. A sniper had positioned himself on a small rise, taking aim at them. Emily froze for a split second, then adjusted Cole's body, using it as a shield. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline fueling her every move. She had to get them to cover before the shot found its mark. With a grunt, she heaved the captain over a small rise, pulling him toward the ditch. Every inch was a victory against both physics and death itself. The ditch finally came into reach. Emily slid Cole inside, positioning him so that the sides of the shallow depression offered maximum protection. She collapsed beside him, gasping for air, her uniform covered in dust, blood, and sweat. The world still roared around her. Bullets streaked past, and the enemy's positions were still active, but for a moment they had a tiny advantage. Cole was alive. That was all that mattered. She checked his pulse again, breathing hard. "You're okay. You're alive," she whispered. His eyes fluttered open weakly, and he managed a faint nod, whispering, "Thanks, Torres." Emily allowed herself a brief flicker of relief. There was no time to celebrate, but the knowledge that she had kept him alive for even these few critical moments steadied her resolve. Emily's body shook with exhaustion, but her mind was razor-sharp. The enemy hadn't given up. They were regrouping, moving strategically along the ridges, aiming to eliminate any remaining threats. She scanned the horizon, noting positions, calculating how to maintain cover, and keeping one hand lightly on Cole's chest to monitor his vitals. Every second counted. Every decision could mean life or death. She glanced at the other soldiers who had taken cover near the ditch. Some were wounded, some panicked, and some were holding their positions with shaky aim. Emily barked quick orders, guiding them to suppress fire while she focused on the captain. She was no longer just a medic. She had become a pivot, the anchor holding together the fragile survival of her team. Hours seemed to compress into moments. Emily didn't allow herself to feel the pain of her scratches, the fatigue in her muscles, or the heat of the Afghan sun bearing down on her. Her vision was sharp, her focus unbroken. Dragging Cole had required every ounce of strength, and keeping him alive would require even more. She felt a surge of determination. She would not fail. Not here, not now. The enemy made one final push, advancing closer to the ditch, rifles aimed and ready. Emily's mind raced. There was no time to call for support, no time to wait for others. She prepared herself to act decisively, knowing that the next few moments could determine the lives of everyone in that valley. Every breath, every heartbeat, every action was critical. With a final glance at Cole, Emily tightened her grip on his uniform, pressed him against her, and whispered, "We're not done yet. Stay with me?" Bullets tore through the air, the valley trembling under explosions, but Emily was unwavering. Survival was a war within a war, and she was determined to win it. The shallow ditch offered some protection, but it was far from safe. Emily Torres pressed herself against the dusty earth, sweat and blood dripping from her hair, her uniform torn and stained. Captain Ryan Cole lay beside her, pale and shivering, the wound in his shoulder already partially stabilized by her quick thinking and steady hands. She kept a gentle but firm pressure on the tourniquet, checking his pulse, counting every heartbeat, knowing that every second was precious. The world around them still thundered with gunfire, explosions, and the cries of men fighting for their lives. Emily's eyes darted toward the ridge above them. Shadows shifted, revealing enemy combatants moving with calculated precision, closing in to finish what their initial ambush had begun. The young private who had been frozen before now peeked. Out from cover, rifle trembling in his hands, fear etched in every line of his face. Other soldiers were pinned down or injured, too frightened or overwhelmed to engage effectively. The enemy had the advantage, and Emily knew it. Survival demanded action. For a brief moment, Emily considered her options. She was a medic, trained to heal, to save lives, not to engage in combat. But the situation left her no choice. Cole's M4 lay just beside him, partially covered in dust and blood, the rifle untouched since the captain had fallen. Her hands brushed it instinctively, and she felt a surge of determination. Fear clashed with necessity. Her mind raced. If she didn't act now, they would be overrun, and the lives of her comrades and the captain would be lost. Emily picked up the M4, sliding the strap over her shoulder. Her fingers gripped the weapon, heart hammering in her chest as adrenaline surged through her veins. She knew how to fire. She had trained countless hours, but this was different. This was real. This was life or death, not practice or drills. She took a deep breath, centering herself. The first pull of the trigger would change everything. There would be no turning back. A flash of movement caught her eye. An insurgent crouched behind a rock, rifle aimed directly at the ditch. Emily's breath caught in her throat for a split second, then she steadied her stance. She squeezed the trigger, and the enemy collapsed, a clean shot that both surprised and reassured her. Another appeared on the ridge, attempting to flank them, and she fired again, controlled and precise, suppressing the enemy with each pull of the trigger. Her mind was clear, focused entirely on the task at hand. The other soldiers looked on, in awe. The private beside her finally raised his weapon and began firing as well, inspired by her calm, decisive action. Emily felt a fleeting pang of fear that this wasn't enough, that more enemies would come, that she couldn't hold them all off. But she pushed it aside. She had no time for doubt. Each shot she fired, each decision she made, was a step toward survival. Her training, her courage, her instinct, they all converged in this moment. Cole groaned, trying to sit up slightly, but Emily pressed a hand against his chest. "Don't move," she said firmly. "I've got this." Her eyes scanned the ridgeline, tracking movement, calculating angles, predicting trajectories. Each insurgent was a threat, and she neutralized them with ruthless efficiency. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, her focus absolute. She was no longer just a medic. She was a force of nature, a barrier between life and death. The insurgents regrouped, realizing that their initial plan had failed. They attempted to coordinate an attack from multiple angles, but Emily anticipated their movements. She moved slightly, dragging the M4 with her as she positioned herself for maximum cover. She fired selectively, accurately, each round precise and deadly. Her eyes flicked constantly between Cole and the battlefield, ensuring he remained safe while she fought to keep the enemy at bay. A grenade exploded nearby, throwing dirt and rock into the air, and Emily was momentarily blinded by the plume of smoke. She coughed, spat dust from her mouth, and immediately resumed firing. Her body ached, her muscles trembled, and her hands were raw from gripping the rifle, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Cole's life, the lives of her unit, depended on her. The adrenaline coursing through her veins fueled her strength, and fear became a tool rather than a hindrance. The young private beside her fired sporadically, clearly terrified, but determined to follow her lead. Emily shouted quick instructions, guiding him to aim properly, reminding him to take short, controlled bursts. "Suppress fire. Cover the flank. Don't stop." She barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. For the first time, she realized that her role as a medic had expanded. She was not only saving lives, but leading the defense, inspiring courage where there was panic. Minutes passed like hours. Emily maintained her position, alternating between firing and checking Cole's condition. His pulse was weak, but steady, a sign that her previous efforts had bought them enough time. She continued to engage the enemy, picking them off one by one, forcing them to retreat behind cover and rethink their strategy. Her focus was absolute, her movements precise, and her courage unwavering. Every shot, every command, was calculated for maximum effect. A sudden movement caught her attention. 3 insurgents attempting to converge on their position from the left flank. Emily adjusted her aim and fired, dropping the first one cleanly. The second hesitated, giving her just enough time to adjust and take the second shot. The third tried to flee, but her eyes tracked him, and she fired again, forcing him to retreat behind cover. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She had become the line of defense, the barrier between survival and death. Cole's breathing grew steadier as Emily continued her relentless defense. She allowed herself a brief glance at his face. He was alive. That knowledge steeled her resolve. The enemy was skilled and relentless, but so was she. She wasn't just a medic anymore. She was the embodiment of determination, courage, and survival. She had crossed a line, one that few medics ever had to cross, but there was no going back. This was war, and she was now fully engaged in it. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the valley. The insurgents, realizing their advantage had been lost, began to retreat cautiously, still keeping their distance but wary of the medic who had become a deadly force. Emily didn't allow herself to relax completely. She continued to watch, her weapon ready, ensuring that no sudden movement threatened Cole or her unit. She had held them off, bought time, and maintained control in a situation that had seemed hopeless just moments before. Her body was exhausted, muscles trembling, hands raw and burning from the strain of the rifle, but Emily refused to stop. She had transformed, a medic no longer bound to her traditional role, but a warrior, decisive and lethal, driven by necessity and courage. The valley around her still rumbled with the echoes of war, but she had claimed a small victory, one that meant life, survival, and hope. Emily allowed herself a single brief breath of relief. She glanced at Cole, alive, and felt a surge of determination. The fight wasn't over. Reinforcements hadn't arrived yet, and the valley remained dangerous. But for the first time, she realized that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. She had changed the course of the battle, not through numbers or firepower alone, but through courage, skill, and an unbreakable will. And as the enemy retreated, Emily Torres knew that the line she had crossed that day, from medic to warrior, would define not only the outcome of this battle, but the lives of everyone she fought to protect. In that moment, she embraced it fully, ready for whatever came next. The valley echoed with the relentless chaos of war. Emily Torres's muscles screamed, her lungs burned, and her hands were raw from gripping the M4, but she didn't slow. She crouched low beside Captain Ryan Cole, who was still pale and shaking, his wounded shoulder pressed tightly against her side. Every second was a gamble. One wrong move, one lapse in focus, and the insurgents could overrun them. She had become the barrier between life and death, and she would not falter. The young private who had been frozen earlier now fired with hesitant bursts, inspired by Emily's calm and precision. Aim low. Control your trigger, she barked, guiding him through the chaos. His shots were uneven, but effective enough to keep some of the enemy suppressed. Emily's mind raced, scanning for movement along the ridges, calculating angles, predicting the enemy's strategy. She was no longer just a medic or a soldier. She had become a linchpin in the survival of her team. Explosions tore through the valley as insurgents repositioned, attempting to flank them from multiple angles. Emily adjusted her stance, dragging Cole slightly behind a larger rock for better cover, while still keeping an eye on advancing threats. Every movement was a calculation. How far to move, when to fire, how to protect the wounded without exposing herself unnecessarily. She had trained for combat situations, but nothing could fully prepare someone for the weight of life and death in real time. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded nearby, throwing dirt and debris across Emily's face. She coughed, wiped blood and dust from her eyes, and resumed firing, targeting the nearest enemy combatants with deadly accuracy. Her adrenaline surged, masking the exhaustion and pain coursing through her body. She was locked into survival mode, her mind sharp, her reflexes honed by training and sheer necessity. Cole groaned, trying to move slightly. Emily pressed her hand firmly against his chest. "Stay down. Don't move," she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos. She quickly scanned her surroundings, noting enemy positions and calculating escape routes. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady, every shot measured and deliberate. She was in control of the immediate battlefield, a single human force standing between the wounded and death. Another insurgent appeared on the ridge, aiming directly at them. Emily didn't hesitate. She squeezed the trigger, and the enemy fell, suppressed by her precision and calm under fire. The other insurgents hesitated, realizing that the medic-turned warrior was not an ordinary threat. Emily's mind raced, knowing she had to maintain this defensive advantage until reinforcements arrived. Every second bought was precious. Every bullet fired was a chance at survival. Nearby, the younger soldiers attempted to rally, using Emily's leadership as a model. She shouted instructions, pointing to cover, guiding aim, and coordinating bursts of fire. She was no longer just protecting one life. She was coordinating the defense of the entire group, ensuring that the wounded and frightened soldiers had the best chance to survive. Her voice cut through the din of battle, firm and authoritative, giving structure to the chaos around her. Emily's body ached, every muscle screaming from exertion. She had fired dozens of rounds, crouched, shifted positions, and dragged Cole across dangerous terrain. Yet she remained relentless. Survival demanded nothing less. Each shot she fired, each command she gave, kept the enemy at bay, buying vital time for her team. She had become more than a medic. She was a force of nature, a shield against death itself. The insurgents regrouped again, realizing they could not take the ditch without heavy losses. They attempted to coordinate a larger assault from multiple angles, trying to overwhelm the remaining soldiers. Emily anticipated their strategy, firing selectively to suppress and disorient, ensuring that no one could approach without facing lethal resistance. Her focus never wavered, and every decision was a calculation to maintain control and protect the lives of those she had sworn to defend. Cole's breathing grew steadier under her careful monitoring. Emily allowed herself a brief glance at his face, noting the faint flicker of consciousness and recognition. He was alive. That small victory fueled her determination further. The enemy may have had numbers and firepower, but Emily had precision, courage, and unyielding resolve. She had transformed from medic to a guardian, a living embodiment of survival instinct under fire. Another wave of insurgents attempted to advance, using the cover of rocks and sparse shrubs. Emily shifted slightly, dragging Cole with her to a better defensive angle, firing with meticulous accuracy. She adjusted her aim, calculated bullet trajectories, and coordinated with the remaining soldiers to create overlapping fields of fire. Her presence was magnetic. The young private beside her mimicked her stance, aiming and firing with more confidence. Emily's actions had elevated everyone's resolve. Time stretched unbearably. Every second felt like an eternity as bullets tore through the air. Explosions rocked the earth, and smoke and dust choked the valley. Emily ignored the pain in her arms, the fatigue in her legs, and the searing heat of the Afghan sun. She could not afford distraction. Cole's life, the survival of the remaining soldiers, and the tenuous control of the battlefield rested on her shoulders. A sudden movement caught her eye. Insurgents trying to circle from the left. Emily's pulse surged. She fired, forcing them back, then shouted instructions to the private and other soldiers, coordinating a small counter-defense. Her voice carried authority, confidence, and clarity that cut through the chaos, giving structure to an otherwise uncontrolled battlefield. She was no longer reacting. She was controlling, directing, and dominating the fight, despite the overwhelming odds. Minutes stretched on, punctuated by bursts of gunfire and the dull thuds of distant explosions. Emily continued her relentless defense, ensuring Cole remained protected while maintaining suppression against the insurgents. Each shot was deliberate, calculated to minimize risk to herself and maximize safety for those around her. Her exhaustion was total, but her focus was absolute. She had become the anchor, the keystone holding survival together in a collapsing world. The enemy finally hesitated, recognizing that their coordinated attacks were being repelled. Emily didn't relax, keeping her weapon trained on potential threats, scanning for even the slightest movement. Cole's breathing had stabilized, and the faint color returning to his face reassured her that her efforts had succeeded, at least for now. Yet Emily knew the battle was far from over. Every moment still demanded vigilance, precision, and courage. For hours she fought, alternating between firing, checking Cole's condition, and guiding the remaining soldiers. Her body screamed, her muscles burned, and her energy dwindled, but Emily refused to surrender to fatigue. Survival demanded endurance beyond what most could imagine. Every action, every decision, every shot fired was a testament to her skill, determination, and unbreakable will. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the valley floor, Emily realized the insurgents were retreating, at least temporarily. They had been forced back, unable to overcome her precision and relentless defense. She didn't allow herself a sigh of relief. The battle wasn't over, but she had won a crucial part of it. She had held her ground, protected her captain, and inspired the terrified soldiers around her to fight rather than flee. Emily Torres had become more than a medic. She was a warrior, a defender, and a force to be reckoned with. She had crossed a line from caregiver to combatant, driven not by ambition but necessity. The valley, once a place of deadly uncertainty, now bore witness to one woman's indomitable courage. She had taken on impossible odds and held the line, ensuring that lives would be saved and that hope would endure even amidst the chaos of war. The valley seemed endless, a war-torn expanse of dirt, dust, and debris, echoing with the relentless roar of gunfire. Emily Torres pressed herself low beside Captain Ryan Cole, the M4 still clutched tightly in her hands. Her body ached, her gloves torn and sticky, sweat and blood mingling with the dust that coated every inch of her uniform. Every nerve was on edge. Every second brought new threats. But now, a distant, unmistakable sound began to cut through the chaos. The whop-whop of helicopter blades. Emily's heart leapt. Reinforcements, air support, hope. For the first time in hours, the possibility of rescue shimmered on the horizon. The young private beside her looked up, eyes wide with disbelief and a spark of renewed courage. Emily allowed herself a flicker of hope, but only a flicker. The insurgents were still active, still dangerous, and they had likely noticed the approaching aircraft. She couldn't let her guard down. Not yet. Survival demanded constant vigilance. The sound grew louder, rhythmic and mechanical, cutting through the din of battle. Dust swirled violently as the helicopters descended, the rotor wash sending loose stones and sand whipping across the valley floor. Emily used the distraction to reposition Cole slightly, dragging him toward the center of the ditch, where he would be more visible to the rescuers, but still partially shielded. Her hands were raw, her muscles trembling from exhaustion, yet her mind was razor-sharp. She had to coordinate with the incoming support while keeping the enemy suppressed. On the ridge above, the insurgents froze, calculating the new threat. Emily didn't hesitate. She fired with deliberate precision, forcing them to keep their heads down. She shouted instructions to the private and other soldiers around her, guiding them to cover vulnerable angles and create overlapping fields of fire. Keep them pinned. Don't let them move. Air support is coming. Her voice carried authority, cutting through the chaos like a blade. The helicopter's shadows fell across the valley, moving closer, signaling salvation and a turning point. Emily knew that this was the moment she had been fighting for, the pivot between desperate survival and hope. Yet she also knew the danger was far from over. The insurgents would attempt to take advantage of the distraction, to flank or attack before extraction became possible. Her focus sharpened further, every sense heightened, every movement deliberate. Cole groaned, trying to sit up slightly. Emily pressed a hand firmly against his chest. "Stay down," she said, voice calm but urgent. "They're here to get us out, but we're not out yet." She scanned the ridges again, spotting several insurgents attempting to maneuver into better firing positions. Emily raised her M4 and fired, forcing them back, suppressing them enough to buy precious seconds. The young private beside her followed her lead, and together they maintained a fragile line of defense. As the helicopters descended, the first ropes hit the valley floor. Soldiers rappelled down swiftly, their weapons trained on the enemy, their movement precise and coordinated. Emily recognized the familiar insignia of a U.S. airborne unit, and relief surged through her, despite the fatigue that threatened to overwhelm her. The extraction had arrived, but it was still a race against time. Every second mattered. Every action could mean life or death. Emily shouted instructions to the young soldiers, coordinating their movement toward the ropes while keeping cover fire on the insurgents. She checked Cole again, pulse steady, shallow but strong enough for extraction. She adjusted the tourniquet, ensuring that it held firmly. Her hands were trembling, her energy nearly spent, but her mind remained clear. She could not fail now. Not after everything. The enemy seemed to realize that their advantage had evaporated. Some attempted to retreat, while others tried to maintain sporadic fire, hoping to disrupt the extraction. Emily remained relentless. She fired selectively, suppressing threats, ensuring that Cole and the other soldiers could move safely. Her body screamed, her muscles burned, but she pressed on, driven by necessity, courage, and the knowledge that failure was not an option. A sudden explosion rocked the valley, throwing dirt and debris into the air. Emily shielded Cole instinctively, grit and determination etched into every line of her body. She could see the insurgents' desperate attempts to regain control, but the arrival of the helicopters had changed everything. Air support provided not just hope, but overwhelming firepower that tilted the odds in their favor. Emily continued to fight, covering the retreat and ensuring that the wounded made it safely toward the extraction points. One by one, soldiers began to climb the ropes, Cole being assisted by Emily herself. Her body trembled with exertion as she helped him up, keeping him steady despite his weakened state. Bullets tore past them, kicking up dust and stone, but Emily moved with precision, instinct, and unyielding determination. Each movement was a calculated risk, each step toward safety a small victory against the relentless chaos of war. Finally, Emily secured Cole and began her ascent. Her arms burned, her legs shook, and sweat stung her eyes, but she continued upward. Behind her, the remaining soldiers followed, guided and inspired by her calm under fire. The insurgents attempted one last flurry of resistance, but the combination of Emily's precision, the soldiers' coordination, and the helicopter's presence made it ineffective. One by one, they were lifted from the valley, the nightmare beginning to recede behind them. As she reached the helicopter deck, Emily glanced down at the valley, now partially silent, smoke curling into the sky. The insurgents were retreating, their numbers diminished, their plans thwarted. Emily allowed herself a brief exhale, knowing that the immediate danger had passed. Yet she remained vigilant, scanning the horizon until Cole was fully secured inside the helicopter and the young soldiers were accounted for. Her focus had never wavered, even amidst exhaustion, blood, and chaos. Inside the helicopter, Emily finally allowed herself to collapse slightly, her muscles trembling with the intensity of the past hours. Cole, stabilized and breathing easier, looked at her with gratitude and disbelief. "You saved us all," he whispered. Emily shook her head, voice hoarse from shouting and exertion. "We survived. That's what matters. I just made sure you are still alive to see it." As the helicopter lifted into the sky, Emily Torres finally had a moment to breathe, to let the adrenaline ebb slightly, and to reflect on the extraordinary events of the day. She had crossed a line from medic to warrior, from caretaker to defender. She had faced impossible odds, relentless enemies, and her own physical limits, yet she had prevailed. The valley below was scarred, but she had ensured that the lives within it remained intact. Looking around at her fellow soldiers, Emily felt a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and quiet pride. They had survived because she refused to yield, refused to pause, refused to let fear dictate her actions. She had become more than a medic that day. She had become the line between life and death, a living testament to courage, determination, and the relentless will to survive. The sun dipped lower behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows over the valley floor. Emily watched silently as the landscape receded beneath the helicopter, the battle behind them, a reminder of the chaos of war and the power of one individual to change its course. She didn't speak, didn't celebrate. The work wasn't over. But she allowed herself a brief moment of quiet reflection, knowing that she had faced the abyss and emerged unbroken. The sky opened above them, the blades of the helicopter slicing through the cool evening air. Emily's hands finally relaxed on the M4, though her grip remained instinctively firm. The battle had been fought, the enemy repelled, and her captain alive. The valley below would bear the scars of conflict, but the lives she had saved would continue, a testament to courage, skill, and unyielding resolve. And in that moment, as the helicopter soared toward safety, Emily Torres realized that she had not just survived the day, she had changed it. The line between fear and courage, between despair and hope, had been crossed. She had become something more than she had ever imagined, a protector, a warrior, and a hero. The roar of the helicopter's blades finally drowned out the chaos of the valley below. Emily Torres sat beside Captain Ryan Cole, her uniform soaked with sweat and blood, her gloves torn, and her muscles trembling from hours of relentless exertion. Yet, despite the exhaustion, a profound calm settled over her. The immediate danger was behind them, the enemy repelled, and the wounded beginning to breathe easier. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to look around and truly absorb what had happened. Cole, still pale but stabilized, turned to her with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. I don't even know how to thank you," he said, voice strained but steady. Emily shook her head, brushing dust from her uniform. "No thanks, sir. Just doing my job. And a little extra," she replied quietly, though she knew it was more than a little extra. What she had done went beyond duty. She had saved lives, inspired soldiers, and altered the course of the battle. The other soldiers, huddled inside the helicopter, began to recover their composure. Faces once frozen in fear now displayed relief, gratitude, and awe. The young private who had panicked hours earlier caught Emily's eye and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her bravery and skill. Emily allowed herself a faint smile. She hadn't just saved their lives, she had empowered them, transformed their fear into action, and demonstrated what courage looked like under impossible conditions. As the helicopter flew toward the forward operating base, Emily's mind replayed the events of the day. The ambush, the chaos, the dragging of Cole under fire, the moments when she had fired the M4, and the precise suppression of the enemy. All of it felt surreal now, like a vivid nightmare she had survived. Yet every ache in her body, every tremor in her hands, and every drop of blood on her gloves reminded her that it had all been real. When the helicopter touched down, medics and support personnel rushed toward them. Emily immediately helped Cole down, supporting him even as her own strength wavered. Soldiers surrounded them, offering water, first aid, and words of praise. For the first time, Emily let herself acknowledge the magnitude of what she had accomplished. She had not only saved her commander, but had protected her entire unit under extreme conditions, a feat few could claim. Colonel James Thornton, who had been coordinating the overall operation, arrived moments later. He surveyed the scene, eyes landing on Emily, and nodded with quiet approval. "Torres," he said, voice steady but carrying weight, I've heard a lot of brave medics in my career. Today, you've redefined it. Emily's cheeks flushed, and she lowered her eyes modestly. Recognition was not what she had sought, but after everything, it felt oddly validating. Cole, now supported by medics, turned to Emily. You didn't just save me. You saved all of us. You held this unit together when everything was falling apart. His words, earnest and heartfelt, pierced Emily's exhaustion. She allowed herself a deep breath, realizing that the impact of her actions stretched far beyond herself. Lives had been preserved, courage had been instilled, and hope had been sustained, all because she had refused to give in to fear. The debriefing that followed was intense. Emily recounted the events with precision, describing her decisions, her movements, and her calculations under fire. Superiors listened intently, impressed by the combination of skill, courage, and composure she had displayed. Her actions were no longer just extraordinary. They were historic within the context of the battle. Every bullet fired, every maneuver executed, and every risk taken contributed to a narrative of heroism that would be remembered long after the valley had been reclaimed. In the quiet moments after the debrief, Emily allowed herself to finally rest. Her body ached from hours of dragging, firing, and bracing for impact, but her mind was alive with reflection. She thought of the young private, of Cole, of every soldier who had relied on her in the most extreme circumstances. She realized the heroism wasn't just about individual action. It was about inspiring others, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and making critical decisions under impossible pressure. Medals, commendations, and official recognition would come later. For now, Emily stood quietly at the edge of the base, watching the sun dip below the mountains. The battlefield below had been transformed, scarred by conflict, but alive with the echoes of survival. She felt a profound sense of closure, not triumph, not victory, but the deep satisfaction of having acted decisively when it mattered most. Lives had been preserved because she refused to falter. Colonel Thornton approached again, this time with a small group of officers and soldiers. Torres, he said, voice firm but warm, what you did today is the reason we succeed, even against impossible odds. You've set a standard for courage, for dedication, and for selflessness that we will remember. Emily nodded, understanding that recognition, while not her goal, was a testament to the lives saved and the impact of her choices. Cole, now stabilized, stood beside her. He placed a firm hand on her shoulder. I've served with brave people before, Torres. But what you did today, it's something else. You went beyond everything we've trained for. You are our shield, our strength, and our hope. Emily felt a lump in her throat. She had always believed in doing her duty, in helping her fellow soldiers, but hearing it articulated so directly, so sincerely, stirred emotions she had buried beneath adrenaline and focus. The young private approached as well, carrying his rifle and a newfound confidence. Thank you, Sergeant Torres, he said simply. I don't know if I could have done it without you. Emily gave him a small nod, recognizing the transformation she had helped inspire. Courage, she realized, was contagious. Fear could immobilize, but action could liberate. Today, she had shown not just survival, but how to fight, lead, and inspire even under the most extreme circumstances. As night fell over the forward operating base, Emily found herself reflecting on the day. Every moment of fear, every second of chaos, every calculated risk had led to this outcome. She had faced death, guided others, and transformed the tide of a battle that had initially seemed unwinnable. And in doing so, she had discovered something essential about herself, the ability to act decisively, courageously, and selflessly, even when every instinct screamed otherwise. The story of the combat medic who hauled her commander through enemy fire, fired an M4 with deadly precision, and saved her unit would become legend within her battalion. Yet for Emily, the significance was personal. It wasn't the recognition or medals that mattered. It was knowing that she had made a difference, that lives had been spared, and that the courage of one person could alter the course of events in ways that seemed impossible. As she looked up at the stars beginning to pierce the night sky, Emily Torres felt a profound sense of peace. The battle was over, the survivors safe, and the valley below, though scarred, had witnessed a story of courage, determination, and the unbreakable human spirit. In the silence of the evening, with helicopters now returning to base and soldiers tending to the wounded, Emily understood that heroes were not born. They were forged in moments of crisis, in choices that demanded everything, and in the unwavering commitment to protect life, even at great personal cost. And in that quiet, reflective moment, Emily knew she had emerged not just as a survivor, but as a hero, one whose courage would echo far beyond the battlefield, inspiring all who heard her story.